Good afternoon, everyone. Is everyone able to hear me? You're able to either give me a thumbs up or put it in the chat. That would be great. Awesome. Okay, good. Because was having some difficulties earlier. It turned out I hadn't actually started the meeting. Um, all right. I see lots of familiar faces. Hello to some of you that, I know well. Victoria, hello. Pam, Charlotte, it's great to see you guys. And I see lots of new faces, which is also great. So welcome. Let me start by sharing my screen. There we go. And again, is everyone able to see the screen? You should have the webinar series logo up and not my face anymore. Yes, is that right? Okay, perfect. Wonderful. All right. So everything seems to be working well. Hopefully when I start, yep, we are recording so we can have this for prosperity and we should be ready to go. So I like to start on time. I know we're about 1 minute behind, but I think all in all, we should be good to go. So again, for those of you that are returning, thank you so much for your time. I love seeing you guys here and keep returning, and that's wonderful. As well as, and actually one of you, I was working on one of your your reports before I came on here. And then the others, for you that may not be as acquainted with pro ergonomics, our webinar series is a free resource we like to provide our clients and the public or organizations just to try and, I guess, just share ergonomic information and knowledge. We recognize that it is a bit of a gray science, and for a lot of us, when we're just looking for the ease of black and white, the gray of it makes ergonomics a little bit more challenging. I think sometimes we get lost in the like, where's the clarity, and therefore what should we do? And which stemmed kind of the next two sessions. These are things that had come up in conversations with various clients of mine. And so we have this one today, which is it was a question that I get asked kind of on and off, but they're like, what are other people doing? Like if I'm struggling, what are others, what other challenges are they having? What are they doing to, you know, keep their program robust? And is there things that we can be doing that can maybe make that easier? And so that's what this session's about. We've never done a session like this before. If you come on regularly, you'll see that there's kind of like an ebb and flow in content. That's the one nice thing about having only really 7 hazards in ergonomics, is that our content is a bit of a wash and repeat. And so this is new. This is a little bit different. So hopefully, if this is something that interests you, this is maybe something we can continue going forward with, and just kind of giving little snippets and ideas of maybe what is making some organizations' ergonomics programs like a success and robust, and maybe things that you could implement to make yours a little bit easier. So food for thought there. So please let us know if this is something that turns out to be helpful and maybe inspiring, and whether we should do it, at least, once or twice a year, just to kind of update. Next week's, not weeks, that's a little bit overkill on our part. Next month's session is another one that came up, and it was a question we get all the time, and it has to do with manual material handling and upper limits, right? There is a want and a need to just kind of, again, clarify things, clean things up, make them more black and white. And we try and do that with trying to set some limits. And so that is a conversation of trying to understand our horrible answer, which is, I can't give you a limit, right? It's all about the task. It's all about the workstation. It's all about the fit. And that changes for each and every one of your organizations. So that being said, we're going to try and demystify why that is a little bit in our next session. So we'll put a pin in that. We'll discuss that when we get to it next month. But for now, let's kind of get into this session, which is, kind of went through that. How do you compare? What are some of the things that companies are doing to sustain their ergonomics program and really to push it into that proactive zone? Going back here, you can kind of see our taglines are proactive, productive, professional. This is how we want to be seen. We want to be seen as a company that helps drive innovation, that helps drive productivity, but also in a proactive way. So we're not always like chasing our tails, which we all know is going to be exhausting. I'm not going to lie. There is always going to be a reactive side to your ergonomics program. But if we can just visit that side every now and again and really live in the proactive, I think that makes, those of you that are managing these portfolios, it makes your life a lot easier. So what we'll be talking about a bit today is, first off, just going over some very quick kind of what is our goals, right? What have the companies that have decided to, and I won't even say they're making ergonomics a focus. It's definitely not a focus, but a priority. I think that there's different connotations there, and I feel like they are putting a bit more energy into their ergonomics program than some of my other clients that kind of put it in when they have time or put it in when, again, reactive issues come up and it's like, okay, now I have to do it. And so what is it about those companies that are making their lives a little bit easier because their program is, it's a wheel, it's not a square. It has momentum, it is rolling, and we are just kind of keeping up with it. And then we'll get into a variety of different case studies. Now I have these numbered, which you can kind of take or leave, but I've tried to pick ones from like various different industries, sectors. So we'll kind of have a sneak peek into a variety of different environments. All right. At any time, if you have questions, please put them into the chat. I'm not going to necessarily, I may not hit it right away, but I will be checking to see what chats are going on. So please ask any questions you like. If I do not answer your question, either because I've been speaking and other questions have come in and they kind of pushed up your comment and I just didn't see it, or if it maybe takes too long to go through, we always provide any content that we're not able to address in our sessions. We will provide a handout. So if you don't get a handout because we were able to cover everything or we had no questions, but if there's anything kind of left hanging, part of our follow-up is to send out an email that does cover out the questions that were asked that maybe were not addressed during our session, just for some clarity there. Alrighty, so let's get into it. I like to try and make my sessions as interactive as I can, which is a bit challenging during a hour-long webinar, but I want to keep you kind of in this session with some intention and some purpose. And those are some words that I'm trying to kind of carry around a little bit with more weight in all aspects of my life right now. And I feel that they can be helpful. So what I'd like you to do is just kind of spend some time and just write down either 3 things that you are doing that you think are moving your program forward, like moving that ergonomic needle in a positive direction, or 3 things that you maybe aren't doing, but would really like to. Okay. And maybe some of the things that you hear in these various case studies will align with those goals and those objectives. I think it's really important when we're discussing really, anything, I'm supposing, but me being a specialist in ergonomics, this is going to be our focus, is that we always kind of keep our intention, our purpose, and our goal at the forefront. Because I think sometimes again, when that answer is not black and white, we start to scramble for a solution. And one of the things that we will see is that in the scramble, the solution does not become the solution. And in fact, the solution becomes more of the problem. So, what are things that you have done that is making a positive change to your ergonomic program, or some things that you would like to do? If you'd love to share those, we would love that. Please put them in the chat. That would be great. I think it's always helpful for people to see, either outside of their box what other people are hoping to do. So maybe they could like switch theirs out because they think, oh, that's better. I like that. Or reinforce that they're going down the right path because yes, everyone is kind of on the same page. So interact as however you feel comfortable, but just take a minute, scribble down on a piece of paper 3 things kind of that are wants, needs, or goals for your ergonomics program. Okay. Oh, nice, Charlotte. So Charlotte has put in there, do more walkabouts to observe how employees are working. I think that's really good. Sorry, this is going to be a tangent, but I do appreciate that comment a lot because, in working with a lot of companies, in being a health and safety manager myself for several years, there was lots of times, specifically if you work in a really hazardous place, if you work in a very public place, like, maybe your education or your healthcare, where you're in a hospital or a college or university, entering these spaces where public are or where there's a lot of hazards, and we have maybe a committee of people that are not familiar with these hazards. We have a tendency to sometimes go into these areas when workers are not there, right? I know when I was a health and safety manager, we would typically try and find like low production, low operation times so that we weren't bothering anyone, right? And so that we could move around and we could observe and we could inspect the workplace and our workplace inspections. The problem with that and ergonomics, great for health and safety and all kind of purposes. But with ergonomics, we need to see the people, right? We need to see the postures. We need to see the work technique. We need to see how they're interacting with their space. And so I really like that observing how the employees work, because this is an opportunity for us to try and get more interactive. And with that, I highly recommend, again, tangent, that we ask. If you are in production or manufacturing, well, it doesn't really matter. In any workplace that you're at, the people you have working for you are experts at what they do, and they make what they do look very, very easy. And sometimes even then, unless they are literally turned inside out as a pretzel, it is challenging to see some of these hazards. And so talking to your people and asking them, like, where are your hurts? Right? Where are the areas of discomfort? Where are the challenges that make your day just a little bit harder? So great. And I like the concept of, engaging your employees and other parties in the Argo process. And we'll talk about that because that is definitely one of the things that makes your life a lot easier. So I think obviously one of our goals, I appreciate that for those of you that contributed, your first and foremost was not to reduce injuries, but I think it's neglectful to say that that's not a major goal, right? Ergonomics literally comes into every aspect of our life. There's ergonomics in your car, there's ergonomics in your kitchen, there's ergonomics how you sleep. So there's obviously going to be an abundance of ergonomic issues or concerns in the workplace. And so how are we navigating those when injuries do happen? How are we getting people to return to work quickly, easily? How are we making sure our job accommodations are sticking and are actually improving the conditions and not putting us back into, maybe the start of a new injury or a worsening or an aggravation? So I think, as I said, it would be silly of us not to mention the injury component. But we then have getting on to maybe the more proactive side. And so this is maybe just trying to be more proactive with your hazards, right? Let's not wait for an injury to happen and realize that, oh, we have high forces, or oh, we have really high repetition, or there's some contact stress here, but rather attacking those and being inquisitive before the injuries happen, before the discomfort occurs. When we do this, we usually find that because it's part of our program, it's happening, and ideally, it's happening by different parties, right? It doesn't necessarily happen by us or by our department. It's happening because our supervisors are doing it. It's happening because our maintenance department is doing it. It's happening because we have an employee feedback loop where our employees are giving us this information, right? It's not always, as much as we do love boots on the ground, but your boots on the ground are either to just to reinforce that things are working well. Ideally, it's not a full-blown hazard assessment every time you step foot onto, into a workspace. So yes, just as we were saying, integrate ergonomics into other departments. We've said it so many times in so many webinars that I think I've lost track. And I think it's because the reason is such a key point. Depending on where your portfolio lands, you may or may not have a lot of input into some of the ergonomic hazards that are coming into the workplace, right? Sometimes they're coming in because purchasing is purchasing the wrong equipment. Sometimes it's coming in because the engineering staff is not well versed in ergonomics and they're designing poor equipment. It could be that, nothing is designed for maintenance and facilities, and so they may not even be aware that they're causing concerns and issues with the workplace. So by integrating it into those departments, we can streamline the hazards from ever entering it in. So that kind of falls into the next point where we're ensuring that new products or new tasks are not bringing in new things that we're having to worry about. And we can just focus on kind of this sounds odd, but our core group of hazards that we've always had that, we may always have, but we're trying to refine and minimize. And then there is the job improvement, right? Where because of some of these proactive efforts, by minimizing the hazards, these ergonomic hazards, by reducing them, we are actually going to make jobs easier. So not just that they are not hurting people, but they're actually physically easier to do, that we can actually go through our tasks quicker with higher levels of quality. We are able to fit our workstations better. So that's kind of where we get into the job improvements. And I think that's kind of our gold standard. So we could be working reactively, which is our first column, and that's okay. If that's where you are, that is completely okay. And what I will find is every now and then, even my gold star leaders with their programs, every now and then they have a rush of MSDs. They don't know why, and they feel like they're right back at the beginning. And so everyone at some point will cycle through a bit of a reactionary phase, and that's not something that necessarily we need to worry about, but we do need to be mindful of it so that we can determine whether it's systemic or not, right? Whether this is the top of the roller coaster where our program starts to crash, or whether this is more like a rolling hill and we're going to come out on the other side of this, usually for the better. So a lot of my clients that we've been working with for a long time, they're heavily into the proactive side. They are constantly identifying their hazards. They're constantly assessing their risk and working through recommendations, which is great. That doesn't necessarily mean we're great at doing our follow-up, right? And so that is one of the difficulties I have, is often once you get my report, I'm not usually brought back in for the implementation phase, and that is fine. Right? So there's sometimes when I'll come back and I'll be like, oh, wow, this is new. And they're like, yeah, you recommended this, but we thought this would be better. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I could see why you might think that, but I think we slid somewhere. And so, the follow-up is the piece where we're not necessarily getting to that job improvement stage, right? So we have to go back and kind of review. All right, so these are kind of typically what is starting, keeping going, and highlighting some of these case studies like successes. So let's jump in. The first one is was a municipality, and they were having some issues because they were growing rapidly, very rapidly. They were a very small municipality, and they had been gaining in size annually for over a decade. And so they were still kind of going on a lot of growing pains that I think we all have been in some point in our stages. Is that, first off, they had no program before, nothing at all. They probably had minimal budget. So often in some of my municipalities, I will come across furnishings that are from like the 70s. And I'm like, wow, that desk is a beast. And they're like, yep, we know. It's been here forever, but we don't necessarily have the budget to replace it yet. Or, if we replace this, we're a little bit worried about what kind of expectations that's going to set for everyone else who's also using equipment from the 70s, 80s, 90s. So we had growth being one of their issues. They started finding that almost upon start, within weeks to months, which is a fairly high rate for an MSD to present itself, they were finding that they either had pre-existing issues or they were starting out with improper workstation setups, and so therefore were finding themselves rushing into that discomfort stage rather quickly. So new staff were coming in for pre-existing injuries, and present staff were starting to really feel the effects of some of this massive equipment that they were working at. And so their approach was, we can't financially bring you in, Alex, every time we have a problem, because literally everyone has a problem. And I'm like, nope, I get that. That would not be good use of time, money, or resources. And so we kind of talked it out. And the approach they decided to take was, well, we're spending so much of our time anyways in this portfolio trying to manage all of this discomfort that maybe, since we're making all of these touches with these employees anyways, what would happen if we were the ones that could do the assessment? And perfect start, right? So we underwent and we did the Train the Assessor program, which is a 1-day training session. And the one thing that we love about this program, is that when I do this session, if you were to bring me in and say, Alex, we need you to do an ergonomic office education session, it would take me about an hour and a half, right? You would get that in an hour and a half. So the first hour and a half is kind of just getting the same presentation that I would give to the employees. Then the next hour and a half is spent, teaching you how to present it in a way that's digestible, in a way that clicks with people, giving you the tips and the tricks of, whether it's mnemonics, whether it's references, whether it's jokes, to just really hit home with workers to make them kind of be able to see. Because often what we find, specifically when we have employees that are working in improper workstation setups, they can't see the forest for the trees. However, it is their workstation, and if you breeze in, make a bunch of changes, chances are when you breeze out, they're going to change everything back because you touch their stuff and they don't like it. So we do need to be educators. And so that's what the next kind of couple hours is teaching you how do you go about making a connection with the information we gave so that they can make their choices almost on their own and that they're invested with the content. And then, which is usually the funnest part of the day, we spend the next couple hours kind of poring over all the ergonomic options. If you open your Staples, browser or Grand & Toy catalog, you're inundated with, 100 different mice 200 different keyboards. God only knows how many chairs, desks, all of these things. And then you get the really weird stuff that says it's ergonomic, so that must be true. Most of which I have never in my 30-year career ever recommended. So that's what we spend our time with then. And so we really spent time trying to, because it wasn't going to be enough for them to just be able to tell people how to set their workstation up or adjust it themselves. They really needed to, when we didn't have a fit, they needed to be able to be confident enough to say, okay, well, this is what you need, and know that that choice was going to solve a problem and not going to bring new hazards into the workplace. And so that session really spends, as I said, a couple of hours going through saying, okay, this mouse is for this type of injury or this type of discomfort. This mouse is for people with these types of challenges. You want this keyboard when you see symptoms that look like this. All of that. And so that is very fun, very hands-on. We bring in a ton of product that people can touch, feel, and understand some of the biomechanics and the anatomy changes that happen when you start going into more of a specialty piece of accessory equipment. And so, yes, anytime they spent time with people that were having issues, they would do an ergonomic assessment, they would make adjustments. Which was getting huge positive traction from the staff. Because the reason the office ergonomics program is so successful is because it is a really nice in the box program. And you don't need to have a university degree or PhD to handle office ergonomics. And the best thing about it, as repetitive as it is because it's in a box and you can't really go too far with it, is that people will tell you within the hour that you've helped them, oh my God, I feel so much better. I don't know what you did to my chair, but I can feel a change already. And that's very rewarding, and that catches on. People start talking, and that's what they were finding. And so because of that success, they ended up putting in a policy, and that was that all new staff were required to have an office ergonomic assessment, whether they had discomfort or not, to try and be proactive, right? To try and make sure that the fit of the workstation right from the get-go was going to be a good step. Now, they've been doing this program probably for about 8 years now. And so because of that, there's been kind of back and forths with us. I obviously still go in every time, if there's let's say a motor vehicle accident and a person has got so many issues that it's a bit overwhelming for someone who's just got a 1-day course, so I will go in for that. But we've stayed in contact, and anytime that they want to make a more holistic change, like they want to bring in a new chair model, or they looked at, height adjustable desks, so that they could make sure that they could do as many changes as they could. Those were the two big items. We sat down and looked at, well, what are your options and what's really going to make good sense? Both times, both for the seating and for the desking, what they brought to me was only going to cause problems. It was not going to solve them. And so we found them pretty close to options with close to the same price bracket. I'm not going to say it was the same. They were a little bit more, but it did mean that it really didn't matter who was sitting at the desk. They would be able to get that person set up without any more recommendations. So it was a one and done kind of economic outpour. And they did a retirement program, right? They didn't do everyone at once. They built in a retirement program for the equipment that they had. So very multidimensional. It has been a huge success. They have done a couple of train the assessor programs as they brought more people into the program, and because they're just growing and they need more people to kind of be available. And so I think they have a team of 5 now that are doing it. They started out with just a team of 2. And so we've been in there a couple times to help. They've lost a couple of people too, so that have moved on. But yeah, and it has been great. And every time I've been called in, the reports and recommendations that I have provided are still, from an economic standpoint, quite minimal from what I would expect from someone who has, a broken back in multiple places, or a, a crushed shoulder, or suffering from concussions, right? Usually I go into those going, oh no, this is not going to be a good report to write up. But because they've done such great work and have such sound products and such sound pre-employee setup, we're minimizing a lot of those issues, which has been great. All right. So this is one, and I'm doing this client a bit of a disservice because this is a client that I am in regularly, simply because they've just every year they bite off a bit more of the tasks. And so we didn't start doing every job in this plant, which is a high number of jobs. There's a lot of different jobs in this facility. So we do probably 2 or 3 a year. And it is one of the only clients that I have where every time I go in, and I go in once or twice a year, as soon as the employees remember me, which is kind of nice, but also they're like, oh, you got to see what we did. Right. So this is just kind of one example because it was a more in-depth project that they took on, but all of their recommendations, all of the risk assessments that I've completed, they do work very diligently on making sure that those recommendations are seen through to the end. And it's not necessarily always my direct recommendation. Sometimes they spitball off my recommendation and go in a different direction, but it's working great. Like, as I said, I walk in and I'll be somewhere in the plant and someone will always find me and be like, oh, did you see the new conveyor that we put in that you recommended, and how we adapted it to, to fit whatever need they had? Or, oh, look, we did this. And so it's always very exciting when I go in there. So I feel like this is a little bit downplaying the efforts that they have, because they are constantly making just little tweaks to the ergonomics program when it comes to their manufacturing practices, and their employees are the ones to show me. It's not my contact that's, showing off and being, hey, look what we did. It's not the supervisors showing their due diligence. It is the employees who, other than getting to use it, don't have the same maybe due diligence or responsibility investment as some of the other people that I'm in contact with. So in this specific scenario, they make small metal parts. And so lots of totes of parts, all different kinds of totes of parts, and all different kinds of weights, all different kinds of sizes. And so they were having huge issues with their manual material handling. Their back and shoulder injuries were escalating, and they were like, okay, we need to do something. And we can't wait for the next year when Alex comes in and only looks at one of these jobs, when we know that these parts are being handled almost in every job. And so they pared back and they took a step kind of back and said, we are going to hyper focus just on the lifting. We understand that there's lots of other ergonomic issues, and that, that's what they've been trying to deal with, having me come in and kind of do 2 or 3 jobs a year. But they were like, no, we understand where some of our issues are. We're going to just get a zoom lens in on this one problem. And so we took weights of everything. I literally was there for a whole day just weighing stuff. And they were working kind of alongside me, making sure that I had the proper frequencies of how often these were lifted, and how we were able to extrapolate that into maybe different product runs and maybe different gauges and weights of metal that they would be used. And so, like, massive amount of data. And I ran a ton of different just manual material handling assessments to really pinpoint where their problem areas were. And so it wasn't that every tote was a problem. In fact, we found out 60%. No, I'm lying to you. I think it was 65% of all their material handling was within ergonomic guidelines, which for them, they weren't expecting that. They were expecting that they were going to have to automate everything, and it was going to be this multi-million-dollar thing, and they were potentially going to take away jobs, and it was a lot of anxiety. for a lot of people. And so when I came back and we're like, you know what, all of this is green. You could just put that on the back burner and move on. And so then it became, well, what about the other, 35%? And some of those we were actually able to do fairly easy things. We split up loads. We provided smaller containers, and all of that came into, they set a weight limit. And so from a process standpoint, 65% were already within that weight limit. And so we just needed to say, okay, we're not going to fill any totes above this or any boxes. So they went to their customers and said, look, this is our policy. We will not be having boxes way over this amount. And they actually had really good reception to that. They were fine with that, because on the flip side, their workers were also having to handle these boxes. And so they actually had some gratitude to the client, because they were able to kind of piggyback on this project and know that they would also be above guidelines within their workplace. And so they were actually pretty happy to work with them. Now, were we able to do all of their products with smaller totes and runs without going, because again, we would be increasing the frequency. So was that going to be a problem? So we were running guidelines to figure that out. And so there wasn't. And it ended up being, I think, they ended up investing in this right here. And so our weight limit we set was 28 pounds based on most of their machines and where their conveyor outputs were. We were very much low level. So that was kind of the weight that really became a repeating offender. Anything over that, we found that we were always above. And some of these other projects, it was already a really small container, but because it's metal, it was super, super heavy, and we couldn't not do anything about that. And it had to be done. It would have to be done so regularly that no one else would be able to get to do their job. So we decided to keep that weight, and we did invest, or they did invest in this flipper. So it was basically a scrap bin that would take and pull all the scrap metal out of the machines. And so it would be able to come in here. They would be able to slide this tote or box into this device. It would lift it up, it would dump it, and it would put it down. And they were still, because they were able to maintain the fact that they only did it, once or twice per shift per machine, it wasn't this huge kind of time suck to keep them going. And so this was really well received. The employees were really excited about this one, which is why I decided to showcase it. But as I said, this is a client that every time I go in, the employees will find me and they will show me. And my contact there is incredibly modest. I'm always going back to them and being like, hey, you, I'm like, some good stuff going on out there, and there's a very sheepish smile of modesty that is kind of fun. Anyways, moving on, we have transportation. So this was actually, we've had a version of this. This was out of a municipality, but we've had a version of this in transportation with busing. We've done buses similar to this. We've done a couple of them, but this is one of these sidewalk, like the boomer buggies. And so it did offer some different challenges. The main one when it comes to transportation is cost, right? Because your fleet has already been purchased. That's a lot of money, right? So there's been a couple of times where Jen and I have gone in and we've been like, they're like, oh, we just got a new fleet. And we look at it and we're like, oh no, this isn't good, because, there's just not the space, not the adjustability, the fit is not there. And for those workers that spend a lot of time in a vehicle, we do not have the same kind of breadth of options on how we could be ergonomic available to us. So in this case, we found that only 25% of the workforce would actually physically fit into these pieces of equipment. And so we were struggling there. We had no ability to accommodate injured workers into these areas, and our injured workers, because of these jobs, were becoming higher and higher. And so again, sounds like a very impossible challenge and something that you would just kind of throw your hand up and say, nope, it is what it is. You know, a forklift's a forklift, a boom buggy is a boom buggy, a pickup truck is a pickup truck. And so rather than do that, they were like, okay, well, maybe not everything is a disaster. So similar to what we found in the previous example was we went in and we did a design review of their fleet. And we were able to show them, no, it's not a disaster. We do have areas that are within guidelines. And so then we had to deal with kind of the yellow and the green issues. And what we were able to do is a couple of things. First off, there was better options that could have been made, right? A pickup truck, and a pickup truck are not all created equal. So there are features that you can get that make things, you know, for not much more money, way more impactful for your workers. There are different kinds that we can get. And so first thing we did was we identified, if you are going to replace these, do not replace it with the same, right? This is going to be a same, but very different in that when these die, when these need replacing, we are going to replace it with this model, or if when that time comes, this model maybe isn't available, these features have to be present. And so that was a big thing that kind of took a little, at least there was light at the end of the tunnel. We then kind of took a further, you know, dig in to see which of these could we retrofit? What of these features could we go in and maybe we could change the seating out. Maybe we could change the armrest out. Maybe we could remove the armrest to create more space. What could we change? And there was lots of things. There was things like, you know, there was for these, it was a huge reach to the steering wheel in a lot of cases. And so this was a collar that you could put in. It was like an aftermarket thing. And it basically just bumped out the steering wheel to bring it within guidelines. And I think this was like a $45 part, right? And then there's some of the other things that, you know, we understand. These are not ideal solutions, but they may just make you not go home feeling broken, such as, you know, these seatings had horrible back support. They were massive chairs. So the problem we had is the only people that could work in these comfortably were our smallest people, but the seating was huge. So nothing fit them. Right, the back support wasn't in the right spot. They were like looking like linebackers because their arms were up to the side to try and use armrests. It was an oversize in that space, even though the cab size was quite small. And so looking at things like this backrest that was going to hug their body and kind of fit their frame a little bit better, really, that was one of they loved that. The employees really, really were like, thank you. And then the other thing they did was in the same kind of vein is they did some vehicle ergonomics training. And I know that sounds like, well, isn't that just a no-brainer? But it's not. And so we spent some time, you know, going over things that maybe, again, for the forest, for the trees, we take for granted that we should do, but we're not. And so it's just a reminder, similar to manual material handling training. So talking about handling training. This was a hospital that we worked with, and obviously hospitals and patient handling is always going to be a top concern. This hospital was no different, but their approach to how they addressed it maybe was. So the first thing is they're like, we have all of these, you know, assists and devices and no one is using them. And that is where every manager in every department was like, it's an employee problem. They're not using them. And when we went in and we did an audit, so we did an audit, first off, we wanted to know, okay, you say you have them. How many do you have? Where are they? And what we found out was this is a client that I'm in regularly. And so what we found out was that they had lots of some stuff and not a lot of others. Of the stuff, all the stuff that they had, people were borrowing it from different units as they needed it, specifically some of the more unique things like the bariatric, the very large equipment. And so, yes, we did have a bariatric stretcher. Yes, we did have a hoist that would, but you could never find it because someone had always taken it. And their storage was always a stock room somewhere. So finding it was not timely. And so that became a huge thing. How are we going to make all of this wonderful equipment that we've spent a ton of money on easily accessible, findable? When do we need to know when, okay, you are a department that's going to need this more often, you need to buy more of these, right? So that we do have them on hand, because the one, even though you have it, it's often being used by someone and the other 3 health practitioners are going without. And so that was a big thing. The other thing that we did is we were doing all of their physical demands analysis, because we wanted to make sure that the devices were being captured accurately and that the forces were representative of what was available. But the other thing we did is we did a whole bunch of job coaching sessions. And this is where it became a bit unique, and I think a different take on maybe what you're thinking. And it wasn't me stand in front of the room and tell people on how to, patient handle. Because let's be frank, they do this every day. They went to school for this as well. And so it's a bit arrogant of me to think that I could improve on their work technique, being as educating experience as a lot of these people are. However, I have found that through the education, we are still educating health practitioners in very old ways. There was a lot of, so the method that we did was we attacked training more as an open forum and a group session. So a department would say, okay, we want to do one of our job coaching sessions. Is Alex available on the day that she's here? Yes, I was. And they would, whoever was available would just come into this room. And in kind of groups of 5, we would sit down and we'd be like, okay, let's talk about this. What are the problems? And they would be like, this can't happen. This is so hard on the body. This is okay. Well, how can we do this different? And 70% of the work techniques we engineered out through just work method. Things like people were reaching across the stretcher, like you're seeing here. Whereas we were kind of talking about, well, where is there a place where you're not reaching, maybe head and foot? But they were solving their own problems and they were building on their own ideas. And I was there really to be like, okay, I love that, but now you've created a shoulder problem. And they'd be like, okay, yeah. No, I hear what you're saying. Okay, but what happens if we did it this way? And it was a huge success. Huge success. And the number of people that left there going, oh my God, I just did 4 years of education and we never ever talked about this once. And it was just a very exciting project to take on for these people that, for the most part, when you think about healthcare, it was very much it is what it is. It's the nature of the beast. The next one, again, we're going back to our education system. And so our challenge is that each area, each, I guess, department or faculty was responsible for purchasing their own office equipment and furnishings. So from a health and safety perspective, we had no say. We would walk in and every department looked completely different. So you would find some that you're like, okay, this was really easy to address. Again, office ergonomics are typically really nice in the box assessments to do. And then you would go, oh, well, we went with aesthetic. Or, oh, everyone's just allowed to pick their own. And so they picked it because it was pink or orange. And ergonomics really was not a consideration. And the other thing that they found out was the equipment would show up and the employees didn't even know how to use it. So we were finding chairs that still had all their adjustment features zip tied shut. And so they're like, oh, I just thought my chair didn't adjust. And no, it did. It didn't adjust without the zip ties being cut off. And so, again, we kind of did a bit of a solution. They had a bunch of equipment. They had an opportunity to kind of move forward, and they were going to be given budget. So they wanted to create kind of showrooms that people could come in and kind of test equipment out and kind of vote. So when we were talking about, again, this is kind of went through the height adjustable tables, which height adjustable table was going to be available. So I would go in first and say, yes, no, this is why. And so they ended up having like 3 or 4 options. And then they allowed staff to come in and also weigh in, which was, again, a great PR moment. The chairs became, they decided to go with one of 3 chairs, and those were the only options, so that all of these other, just because it was pink or orange, kind of went away. They had to meet the CSA or BIFMA standards. And again, this is another thing that Office Ergonomics offers us, is actually fairly black and white standards. So when we're looking for the black and white, Office has that. And so based on this, they took it kind of the next step and said, you know what, we've done it for tables, we've done it for chairs, let's do it for all the accessory pieces. And they built kind of a purchasing standard that was, if you needed a mouse, you could only pick from these mice. If you needed a keyboard, you could only pick from these keyboards. Some of them did require someone from health and safety or HR to come in and understand, because if you were buying this crazy ergonomic split keyboard that did all kinds, like, why do you need that? Is if it's because you're having an issue, then let's look at your workstation setup and make sure that, we're doing the right thing. And so they also went through the Train the Assessor program. I don't have that on there, but they did have staff that were, again, available to deal with the day-to-day grind. And that is something we highly recommend, is that it is not cost effective for a lot of you to constantly hire an ergonomic consultant to come in and do office ergonomic assessments. And as I said, office ergonomics, there is a box, there is black and white. And so you don't need to be able to see in Technicolor to be able to find really good answers. And our options are also black and white. It's in a catalog, right? We're not saying, okay, well, what could we fabricate here? No, everything's already been fabricated. We just got to find the right fit. And so even that becomes a little more streamlined. So they went through the same Train the Assessor process. They had staff to deal with the day-to-day. And again, we were brought in for the more heavy hitting issues. All right, we're almost done. This was one they took a very interesting approach. I did not write a single report for this client. We did training. We developed and trained an ergonomics committee. So that is what we did. And then the way they used me was I came in and I sat on the Ergo committee meetings. So once a month I would go in and we would go. So when we're talking about engage with the employees, getting out on and observing how employees are working, once a month, our committee, now that they knew what are the things that Alex looks for when she's out there, they were looking for the same thing. So we were all lined up in what our goals and objectives were. We would just go out and we would say, okay, let's go. We'll start here and we're going to go as far as we can for the hour and a half that we have on the floor. And we did develop a checklist so that we could not necessarily run guidelines. There was, as I said, very different. They decided they did not want to do what we call in-depth risk assessments. And I kind of love that for them. Maybe it's not for everybody, specifically if you're dealing with Ministry of Labor a lot, but for them, they weren't. And they were like, you know what? We know where our problems are. We just need help prioritizing. And again, clearing out some of the noise so that we're focusing on the right stuff. And we would go in, we would do our checklist, we would create prioritization scores, we would go back to the boardroom and we would be like, okay, these are the things in this job that are not looking great. We don't know if they're above or below guidelines. We did not run a guideline. We just did not like it, or the employees didn't like it, and we were just let's move on. We don't like it. We don't need to know if it's above or below guidelines. We don't like it. That's enough. Let's find a solution. And so within 1 year, we looked at 34 jobs. We made over 55 recommendations. And within that year, 17 of them were already completed with high praise from our staff. There was another 20 that were in review, and that review could have been, we were trialing things, we were looking at different options, we had our fabricating opportunities with our maintenance staff, and they were trying some different things. We'd trialed some things, and we're already on to step 2, where we're like, okay, that didn't work quite the way we wanted to. And so that was what that 20 was. Other things was 7 of those 55 like recommendations we realized were worker method. And of those 34 positions, 13 of them really didn't need us spending any time. There was either such low injury risk or literally none. They were like, wow, these are working really well. So we did a variety of things. We did some heavy hitting things where we introduced a new conveyor system. That was one of the most in-depth things we did. Other things were really quite little. Like we had this jar that were people like you've probably seen the big bulk of Parmesan cheese. Anyways, it was a really wide grip, and people were over tightening it and then cross threading it, and it would get jammed. And so we just created this fixture where as it went by with 2 hands, they just had to turn it within this. It was a round cap. The fixture was square, so it would hit a corner and it would tighten it, and it almost worked every single time. So it's not to say it worked every single time, but it took down the cross threading like 90%. It was incredible. These bins were everywhere, and we were doing washing in them. So all the parts were in the bottom of this bin. So you can imagine the bent over postures that were happening there for hours at a time. We put a false bottom in it, rack, so that all the water could still sluice through, all the debris could still sluice through, so that we were still meeting our good manufacturing practices or our GMP practices, but we were doing it with way better postures. So again, very different approach. As I said, didn't write a report, never wrote a report. It was all, I kept a spreadsheet going, and that was about it. This is just one. It was kind of a hybrid of big and little. They had to manually move these reels, and so it was taking 4 people, and all of them, and with the 4, it was still exceeding guidelines because they were so big. And so they ended up putting in these rollers, which meant the bulk moving was happening on them, and it was super easy and could be done by 1 person. And for the more fine motor kind of manipulating these rolls into tighter spaces, they had these pushers. And so they made sure that they did kind of the big, the little, and then the big thing that they did was they made sure that all their PDAs were updated so that all of these lower forces and reduction of handling was being captured. That is one thing that I find that a lot of clients don't do, is they keep sending in descriptions and data to WSIB that is not accurately reflecting the physical demands. And so WSIB is accepting things that isn't actually present. So that was one that they made sure that they were doing. And I thought that was also, a relevant point to discuss. So a couple more minutes, hoping I don't run too far over, but we have, first off, some common themes. I will say, obviously, the reason I know about these clients is because they're all my clients. So all of them are using a consultant for some kind of assistance. I will say all of them were using me quite differently. Some of them were just using me for training. Some of them were using me as a subject matter expert. Some of them were using me for document and data collection and control. But they all had a very intent, purposeful way of how they were going to use the consultant. I was not just a problem solver. I was part of the program that was moving them forward. They almost all combined a combination of reactive and proactive elements. So yes, there was something wrong. right? Whether it was the ergonomics committee that was going out there and saying, we don't like this, whether it was an employee injury, whether it was an employee complaint, something was wrong in a lot of these cases. And so we fixed it, but we tried to figure out how could we capitalize that and make it so that it doesn't happen again, or something similar doesn't happen again. So we were addressing those MSD concerns both through kind of engineering controls, but we were often always making changes to the program, the policy, or the process, which was a big one too. It wasn't just a matter of, okay, here's a cart, go, right? So we made administrative changes as well, which I kind of repeat down there. Anytime we had to do something reactive, we looked to try and turn that into proactive. And so kind of going on the analogy that if it's going to help one, it's going to help all, right? And then same thing, combining big ticket items with fast and quick items, because the big ticket items had to happen in order to really make big change. But the stuff that really made the employees part of the program were some of the smaller kind of, the electric pusher, the backrest, just the smaller items that were really immediately providing comfort in a day-to-day life. All right, so with that being said, I do recommend if you are struggling with focus and momentum in your program that you start trying to track it. So you can kind of see here, this was when I was a subject matter, this is kind of an example of the spreadsheet that I created. So we had our scores down the side, so we knew which ones we didn't have to address. We had all the things that we didn't like, and we tracked where we were, who was dealing with it, whether it was done, if it wasn't done, whereabouts were we, and if in some cases, there was no issue. I'm not sure what happened here. I think I may have deleted it. But we had some issues where we started the process and we still haven't come up with a solution, right? So we made note of that. But it became a really impactful way to keep us on track and not to let things fall through the cracks. So every month we were kind of like just pushing the envelope. Okay, well, we're at 60% here. Can we close that out? We're at 40% here. Like, how much longer are we going to be here? And it was very, very, very helpful for keeping everyone always feeling like they were making improvements. And so if I was to give this in a, 8-point checklist, understand the problem fully, right? It's not just someone is hurt. There is usually a more systemic, more underlying concern. And so understand what that is. Try to make it more digestible, right? When we're talking about a fleet of trucks, that seems completely undigestible. So whether it's, again, understanding the problem fully helps with that, but parse it down into a piece that you can do something about rather than just kind of waiting. Only address what needs to be fixed. Look for options that are going to make solutions feasible, okay, and track all of that. This is kind of that, if it's reactive, make it proactive by giving it to people who aren't yet having issues, because it's going to make it easier for them. And then just be prepared. Be able to quickly address issues when they happen and make sure that data is accurate. And often what that comes into is that documentation, PDAs. If an injury happens and you need to get that person back to work quickly, the best way to do that is to have the documentation you need to send to the doctor, to send to WSIB, to make those determinations and keep that ball rolling. The more prepared you are, typically, the more prepared and invested everyone is into making sure this comes out on the right way. And in almost all these cases, training was a component. Spreading the wealth, getting those other departments involved in any way you can. I do everything from ergonomics committee training. Last week I trained all engineers. And so, you again, understand the problem. Is it we need everyone kind of speaking the same language, so we want a committee, an ergo committee? Or is it that, we're missing the mark on our designs, so we need our engineers? Or is it purchasing that needs this because they keep bringing stuff in, they're purchasing things that are causing problems? But understand the problem, make it digestible. All right, so I'm a little bit over, I'm very sorry. But if you do have questions, I see Charlotte, you have a question. How often do you recommend PDAs be updated? If there are no changes to the process, someone should be going out annually and speaking with the employee with the document in hand and saying, look, this is what we've got. Like, is there any changes here that you can see? Specifically focusing on the black and whites. Make sure if you don't have an objective PDA, you're going to be struggling with a lot of your getting into that proactive phase because it's just, it's now a watercolor. It's not even grayscale. You're bringing in a whole bunch of different elements. So try and make things as black and white, and a PDA that's very objective can do that for you. And so looking at things like, are these weights kind of the same? Oh no, you know what? We actually brought in a lift assist. So all of these weights we're not doing anymore. That is important information to know. But so in that case, you go through that conversation and you should have a revision line. So you can have a line, but if every year you're showing it's being revised, that you've looked at it and there's no real major changes, then that should be fine. Actually, so one of the documents I was working on earlier this morning, 2019. And so I felt kind of bad because they had asked me whether they just had added another machine. And so I was like, oh, okay, well then no, I just need to make it a note that there's 5 machines now instead of 3 or 4. And when I'm going through it, I'm like, ooh, maybe 5 does make some changes. And so there's a lot of highlights in this when I send it back to them with these changes that they either need to find out themselves, or I'll do it when I'm next in. So, perfect. Awesome. Yeah, I would definitely review it annually. Any big changes, I would get it redone. And if you have let that go, I would say anything over 3 to 5 years, you need to redo from scratch, even if there's not been any changes, because no one knows. No one knows. All right. If there's not any more questions, I will stop my... Thanks, Charlotte. We try to be amazing. It's a goal. It's one of our intentions. But I appreciate everyone coming. Again, if you can still put things into the chat, and I can always respond after the fact. But it just kind of goes to show and give you a little bit of an idea of all the different things that people are doing and how they're going about it. And I know sometimes we get stuck behind not being able to make it perfect. This is something I struggle with a lot with my engineers. They can't design it perfectly, and so they put it in a pause state so that, oh, well, when we get more money, when the new project comes in, we'll fix it then. And they don't make any changes. And you can see every single one of these, they had a multi-dimensional approach. They were doing little things, they were doing big things, they were doing training things, they were doing work method things, they were doing policy changes. Like, it was all little things that were keeping the ergonomic program always moving in an upward trajectory. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you again. I hope to see some of you next month. And yeah, quick question. In the hybrid work models, you mean the work from home? So the work from home model that we have kind of looked at with a variety of people is again, looking at your policies. So for instance, if they have a specialty mouse at their workplace, are they taking that mouse home? Are you providing a secondary mouse? Like, where is your stance on some of those kind of tiny, more mobile things that really make big changes on how someone feels at the end of the day? The next thing we often will do is we do at home, we still do at home sessions, training sessions, and looking at making sure that, you know, if you're working on your kitchen counter, which by the way is exactly where I am right now. My kitchen table is got the best lighting and easy to say. Plus my home office is under renovation, so I've been here for a bit. Um, yeah, so we need to give people the options to think critically on their workspace and maybe make different choices in their workspace. But we do an at-home session that is a little bit, it still ties to the guidelines, the CSA guidelines and the BIFMA guidelines, but in a much more problem-solving-y way. Because if I'm only there one day a week, what kind of resources are you going to provide for one day a week? So look at those things. The other thing is, and again, you could still do a train the trainer session, but offer virtual assessments and look at that person's workstation virtually. So there's lots of different things you can do. But I think the thing I would not recommend doing is nothing at all, right? Assuming that, oh, well, they're responsible for their own home office. They're working for you and it's your model that you're responsible for them in the long run. And so it is definitely something I would put a program in place. And we do. A lot of us, it came into place when, you know, COVID was in lockdown, and they've just adapted and modified it moving out. And when we're now working in these hybrid situations. So I hope that answered your question. If not, like, we can always chat more at maybe a later date. All right. Perfect. Awesome. Well, it's Thursday. It's not Friday. So I can't wish you a good weekend yet, but I hope you guys have a great Friday. I hope it is low key and relaxing and puts you in a great space to move into the weekend. And I hope to see you all again next month. All right. Take care.